Hi guys, I'm back again. Just trying to see, we're having just a little technical difficulty, but hopefully we'll get started now. Just waiting on the author to join. Sorry about that, just having some slight technical difficulty, but hopefully the author can join us now. Oh, yes. Okay, here we have. Let's see here. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How are you, Doctor?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so exciting. We're getting a lot of people joining in. There are some
I
people
love it.
joining in from Turkey, from Pakistan, from New York, the US. So, all very exciting.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So, please tell me, where are you? Where are you located right now?
So I'm currently based in London, England, and that's why I currently reside. Yeah,
Okay.
it's the weather's miserable out here, but yeah, I'm in London.
Yeah, the weather here has been okay. Today it's sunny. I think tomorrow there's going to be a storm here, but so excited to have you on. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to just introduce you to everyone. So, for everyone that's joining us now, I'm on live with the esteemed author, Mr. Habeeb Akande. I'm so excited he's here. He is a British Nigerian writer, sex educator, and historian. He's the author of 7 books on race and sex in African and Muslim cultures. His main research interests include women's sexual rights, erotology, and female orgasm in Islam and African cultures. He studied Islam at Al Azhar University in Egypt and has given workshops on sexual consent and the clitoris in the UK, France, the US, and Brazil. So, welcome. So excited to have you on. And so maybe we can start off by you telling me what your inspiration was for
My inspiration
to study and to write these books on female sexuality, female pleasure in Islam, erotology.
right, I'll try and keep it brief. I'm a Muslim, alhamdulillah, born into a Muslim household. When I graduated from university, or I think in America you call it refers to it as college, my undergraduate, I wanted to learn more about Islam because I really wanted to understand Arabic and understand from the sources as opposed to interpretation, so to speak. So I went to after I graduated, to within like I think 3 weeks of graduating from university college, I went to Egypt, where I first started studying Arabic and learned a little bit about Islam from some teachers out there. Then I enrolled in the Al Azhar High School because I wanted to understand more about Islamic law and the Quran and Islamic history. And I spent a year and a half in the university. And whilst I was there studying, I came across a number of Arabic works written by Muslim scholars dating back to like from the 9th century up into the 16th century, speaking about sex, intimacy, the importance of men pleasing their wives, women's right to sexual climax. And I was quite surprised by this because in my previous years in the UK, I'd never heard I don't think I came across a khutbah or a lecture speaking about the importance of men satisfying women and women's right to sexual fulfillment. Oftentimes, you hear about men's right to sexual pleasure, and the wife is supposed to do X, Y, and Z in the bedroom, but you don't really hear about the intimacy rights that women have over men, and the fact that there were a number of pre-modern scholars that were encouraging men and teaching men not only about the female anatomy but how to satisfy women. So again, for me, that was I was bewildered by that, and I thought, okay, this will be really interesting. I'm sure many English-speaking audiences would like to hear about this. So that's why I went about start translating some of those works, and then I thought it might be good to maybe do like a modern rendition. So rather than just translate one particular book, a number of the books that I came across, like for example, Imam al-Suyuti, who's a well-renowned, prominent scholar that many people have heard of, but many people don't know that he wrote over 20 books about sex and intimacy and erotology. another scholar, Imam al-Jahid, as well, from the 9th century. He wrote many books about sex. And what I loved about the pre-modern Muslim scholars is that their writing style, they use anecdotes, they use like when they were talking about stories with humorous stories with moral undertones. It wasn't just dry, step by step, this is what you're supposed to do in the bedroom, so to speak, or rulings. Because oftentimes, unfortunately, when we hear about these topics in the Muslim community, it's just halal, haram, halal, this is what you can and can't do, or just focusing on sexual health. Whereas they had, I would say, a personality in these books, because again, it was not only educational, but it's also quite entertaining as well. And that's kind of like my style in terms of I like to learn, but also I like to laugh, and and I think that's one of the best ways of kind of entertaining people. Where, and again, these books were written to adults as well. It wasn't like, because oftentimes, I'm not sure how it's like in the US, but in the UK, oftentimes when we think about sex education, you think about sex education for children or for adolescents, whereas this was sex education for adults, whether they were married, unmarried, and otherwise. So for me, again, I thought this would be really interesting to kind of translate some of these books. It took me from starting initially the research, actually the publication of the book, 10 years of research, and then that culminated in my book, A Taste of Honey, Sexuality and Erotology in Islam, which again is just delving into so many issues in pertaining to sex and intimacy, but putting particular focus on the importance of women's sexual fulfillment and the female orgasm. That came out in 2015. After that book came out, funny enough, it wasn't as well received as I probably thought it would be in the Muslim community. And that was my fourth book. I've written a previous book on race and anti-black racism in Islam. So I was quite surprised that it didn't really receive much attention. It might be because the book, I can probably show you, it's quite a thick book. It's like 300 odd pages.
Yes.
So maybe that's yeah, you quite much tell that. Okay, so maybe the reason maybe because it's quite dense, and again because I wanted to, and I was quoting a lot of scholars, different references from different scholars, both from the Quran, the Hadith, and again, like I said, not only Muslim scholars but also non-Muslim sources as well. And that was the way. So the study of sex and desire in Arabic is known as ulum al-bah, meaning the study of sex or erotology. And they derive their sources not only from the Quran, the prophetic traditions, the Hadith, but also the knowledgeable people of their time, like there's the medics. So whether it's from the ancient Romans, whether it's from the ancient Greeks, whether it's from the ancient Indians, like the Kama Sutra, the Muslim scholars at that time, again, like I said, primarily between the 9th and 16th century, they were like, you could say, social commentators of their time. So like modern day sexologists. So that was something that I wanted to show, that, but also speak about obviously modern contributions that people have had and issues that might interest the contemporary reader. Now, like I said, when the book came out, it wasn't probably as well received by the Muslim community as I thought it would be. Funnily enough, I received more interest from non-Muslims who were studying Arabic erotic literature and things like that. And I gave a couple of presentations in France and other places where they were more interested and fascinated in it from an academic perspective. And then again, I'm just fast forwarding because I wrote a couple of other books subsequent to A Taste of Honey. But then I released another book called Kunyaza, which was a book about an ancient African technique teaching men how women can squirt or orgasm in the bedroom. Right, that book. So that book was generally for a wider readership. It wasn't concentrated at Muslims. Excuse me. And then what happened was a lot of Muslims. Excuse me, I need a drink. That's what happens when you talk too much. A lot of Muslims wanted to read Kunyaza, was interested in it. And I was like, okay, so you're interested in Kunyaza, but I wrote a book about Muslim sexology, but it was like no one was interested. And then a lot of people was asking me Islamic related questions that I already answered in A Taste of Honey. So then I thought, okay, and then when I looked back at A Taste of Honey, I think one of the things that maybe put a number of people off is that it's very thick and it can be quite difficult to read. So then I thought, okay, let me then do a more summarized, concise book that's mainly pertaining to women's issues, like women's sexual rights and female orgasm in both Islam and Muslim cultures. And then that was the book, Women of Desire kind of thing. So yeah, so my passion, the reason why I'm writing about it is because, like I said, for some reason, well, we might be able to elaborate a little bit later, but I think a lot of Muslims are uncomfortable with the topic about sex when it pertains to women, where you see many, events and lectures speaking about porn addiction and how men, need to about porn addiction and the issues that men are going through, but very often we hear about events or talks about the female orgasm or the importance of the clitoris or understanding the female anatomy and teaching men the importance of ensuring that women are sexually satisfied, ensuring that they're creating a safe space where women feel comfortable. Even speaking about issues like female genital mutilation, female circumcision, that does happen in the Muslim communities. But for whatever reason, a lot of, this might be controversial saying this, but I think a lot of Muslim speakers, scholars, and what have you have done somewhat of a disservice by not addressing this topic because it's spoken about. I mean, it happens a lot, but we don't really want to talk about when it happens, when it's issues pertaining to men kind of thing. So that's why I thought, okay, let me start trying to. But that being said, there are a number of people doing great works, especially women in particular. And I thought, okay, it'd be good to kind of highlight their contribution as well, because we often hear about the contributions that Muslim men have made in history. And we can talk about Al-Ghazali and Al-Suyuti, like I mentioned earlier, and Jahid, who wrote about sex and intimacy. But what about the female sex educators? Because there were many female sex educators, even in early Islam, and many people aren't aware of it. So one example, like Hubb al-Madaniya, who was a 7th century sex educator, an Islamic intimacy, you can say expert and authority. And she taught both men and women about sex, intimacy, and how to satisfy your spouse. And she was of the generation of the early companions, not the generation of the Prophet ﷺ, but the generation after that. So she was, and there's a number of scholars that spoke about her in their books in the 9th century up until like I said, the 14th century, and they spoke about not only her knowledge, but her frankness in terms of dealing with men, in terms of, and she got married a couple of times, but there was no shame attached towards her. So again, I wanted to show that a lot of these, because alhamdulillah, now there's more Muslim women that are speaking and teaching people about sex and intimacy. This isn't new in Islamic history. So that's why I thought, okay, first it might be good to kind of document it, because hopefully it'll be something that is beneficial not only for people of our generation, but generations to come. And I think sometimes the written word is more effective than someone who's speaking, because what happens is everyone looks at that person. Whereas when you're putting something down in paper, people can read it and then obviously check the references and then do their own research and then hopefully be empowered or inspired to kind of maybe do something themselves or do something their own style. Whereas if I'm just always the person speaking, I don't want to be known as the only person speaking about this topic, because there's many people doing great work in different fields, and we all got a place to kind of contribute and kind of highlight not only the problems, because I think oftentimes we speak about the problems, but also about, you could say, the solutions or the benefits or the pleasures of sex and intimacy, again, especially for women, and how men could understand that they've got a part to play in that.
It's excellent. Thank you for that. So, I was thinking as you were talking about the taboo, right? So why do you think that there is such a huge taboo in our communities, in our Muslim community, to talk, to educate, to even speak about it?
I think one of the biggest contributory factors was, or is, the fact that after it was colonized by the Europeans in the 19th, 20th century, many Muslim cultures, communities, we adopted a Christian, European, Victorian understanding about sex and intimacy. Even how sex is referred to in the Western world, the English-speaking countries, sex is often like dirty, it's nasty. A lot of this came from Christianity or Christian Victorian, shall I say, where sex was seen as just an act for procreation. And again, if you look at pre-modern Muslim communities, that wasn't the understanding. One of the primary aims or goals of sex was mutual pleasure for both the man and the woman. Whereas nowadays, we've adopted an understanding, again, in Muslim communities, that sex is just for procreation, or it's just for the man's rights. And oftentimes, unfortunately, a lot of women feel that sex isn't even an act that they should enjoy. So again, I think we've adopted, that's definitely influenced the way a lot of Muslim speaking, a lot of Muslim majority countries and cultures, we understand sex and intimacy. And I think even I'll say this as a man, there's too many men speaking because naturally, like as human beings, we've all got a blind spot, right? So obviously, as a man, there's certain things naturally I always will see first and foremost from a male perspective, and it might take me a while to appreciate or understand something from a woman's perspective unless someone brings it to my attention. And the same way with women, that naturally women will see things from a woman or female perspective. And I think the fact that most of our, whether it's lectures, talks, or information that we gather or that we watch, even if it's by way of films, movies, books, popular culture, even porn, it's generally from the male gaze or the male perspective. So our understanding about sex and intimacy and pleasure is often generated from how men view it. So there isn't much scope for to appreciate sex from the woman's perspective. So it's not as holistic as maybe it should be. Whereas, like I said previously, or in pre-modern times, a lot of those early Muslim scholars that I mentioned, like Al-Suyuti, Al-Jahid, and others, they cited women as teaching them as well. It wasn't just a group of men writing books and just saying this how to please women and then writing for other men. They were citing women. For me, the depth of their books was the fact that it wasn't just coming from a male source; it was coming from different sources. Yes, it was a man writing, but he was gathering information from different sources, both from men and women from different cultures as well. And I think maybe that's not. And as whilst sex is a taboo in Muslim communities, I wouldn't say it's a taboo in all Muslim communities because obviously we know we're not a monolith, and there are some communities who are more forthcoming to speaking about this topic than others, and that's understandable. And I'm not saying that everyone should have the same comfort level when we're speaking about this topic, because even during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were some people who were more conservative than others, even in regards to this topic. So I'm not going to give this impression that everyone was very comfortable and open talking about sex and intimacy, because there were some people that was extremely shy and uncomfortable with it, and that's fine. But there's also some people and some women who were very outspoken and comfortable talking about it and vocalizing their rights from men. And the Prophet ﷺ did have no issue with it. So from an Islamic perspective, it's not wrong. And that's what I think should be understood. If someone doesn't want to talk about it, they're uncomfortable with it, that's fine. That's okay. I'm not forcing on someone. But unfortunately, people have got this understanding or misunderstanding that even to talk about it, even to understand or to learn it, it's wrong or it's haram or it's aib. And again, these are all from cultural understandings in terms of what is understood to be unacceptable. And just the last thing, I think another contributory factor why I think sex topic is taboo in Muslim cultures or communities is because a number of men, I think, I don't know if we're intimidated by female sexuality, but we're definitely concerned, I would say.
Yeah.
So a way to kind of deal with that is let's control it. Let's put them away, because we either fear that our women will cheat on us or our daughters may do something can disgrace us and dishonor us, so we need to kind of control it. So that's something which, even if you look at Muslim history, it did develop over a period of time where the rights that women had even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it wasn't as free, you could say, as much as it was maybe in later generations, because some men saw as we need to kind of curb the fitna. And even like, again, in some Muslim circles, unfortunately, women, or the word fitna is like synonymous with a woman, as if anytime a woman's there, she's a fitna, she's a source of sexual temptation. And that's something that, again, is problematic, because we're just looking at women that because they're a source of temptation, we need to kind of keep them away and not be allowed in the public space, because they're going to tempt men, when in reality men should be held accountable. It's like, if you can't control yourself, then you've got the issue, not that you're trying to kind of control her, put her away. So there's a lot of, they're the three things that come to mind why the topic is taboo. But yeah, they're the three main ones.
Yeah, that is excellent. And I'm so glad you bring this up. You've brought up so many important topics, but I just want to welcome people that are just joining us now. I'm speaking with esteemed author Habeeb Akande regarding female intimacy in Islam and female sexual pleasure. So, I wanted to bring up the fact that, you mentioned that it's not wrong. And I think that, I just started up on social media, and I do this TikTok, and so many of the comments that I get from men is that it's wrong. It's wrong to talk about it, and I think especially when you're trying to educate, a lot of people, you get that pushback, especially in like the Muslim community, that it's wrong to educate. And I agree with you. I don't think it's wrong at all. There's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says, the seeking of knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim, be it man or woman. So,
Yeah.
it's so important. And, one of the first things we were taught to do was to read, right? Ikra. So, I agree with you 100%. Knowledge and education is so important for our communities. And I think sidelining women is a big problem. And just like you said, we don't know our own history. And the fact that there were so many, you said, Muslim female scholars that spoke of the subject, right? But we don't know about that. And until you mentioned it, I didn't know about that either. So I'm so glad you're bringing all of this to the forefront. What would you say about, when some Muslims mention haya, that they're, oh, you don't have haya if you talk about this. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So haya, the translation in English is either translated as meaning modesty, or bashfulness or shame. It can mean any one of the three. Now, funny enough, even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that was used even by some people or some women. I mean, towards some women. So, in one particular incident where there was a woman that offered herself in marriage to the Prophet ﷺ, so she offered herself, and that's something that's, again, people look at it that's unacceptable. And then Aisha, no, sorry, not Aisha, another companion, a female companion, when she saw this woman offer herself to the Prophet, she said, like, this woman's got like no shame, no haya. And her father corrected her and said, no, she liked what she saw, as in the Prophet ﷺ, and she approached him, like, as in she did nothing wrong. And even Aisha, in another narration, she also used to mention that when women used to offer themselves in marriage to the Prophet, peace be upon him, she used to say they've got no haya, or she should think that. And when the verse was revealed, when Allah said that it's perfectly acceptable for a woman to offer herself in marriage to the Prophet, and it's up to him whether he wants to accept it or not, then she realized that no, even her understanding of haya and modesty, maybe it has to be redefined or reframed. So I do hear this a lot, and again, this is where it comes down to, it might be cultural understandings of what it means to be like shameful, or, and again, I think people weaponize that word because we know haya is from our religion, it's part of our deen, and I'm not denying that, but what is considered to be modest varies from culture to culture. And that's something that even with scholars, so like a famous scholar, Ibn Battuta, who was a Muslim explorer from North Africa, when he traveled to West Africa, he said that the West Africans, the Muslims there, had no haya, no shame, because from where he was coming from, they were too free in terms of the way men and women were mixing. And then one of the sheikhs at the time, he told him, the things that you're looking at, the interaction, the gender interaction that you're seeing is like unacceptable and we lack shame. It's not an issue the way you see it. So even for a scholar, he had different understandings, different interpretations. So that's why I always try to, if someone's coming from a good place where they're really trying to understand, I'll give them some examples, obviously from early Islamic histories, to understand that what you consider to be modest or shame, that might be for you, and that's fine. But don't necessarily impose that on others. I think that's something that first needs to be understood. And then secondly, do you have an issue with the person, what they're doing, that they lack shame, or is it you yourself are uncomfortable with it? And I think oftentimes it's the person that's projecting their insecurities onto others. Now, if you're the recipient of this, like for example, as a woman, and I think unfortunately women receive some of these attacks more than men, that they may be accused of, lacking shame and being indecent and this, that, and the other. I think first and foremost, even for a man to accuse a woman of, like you hear some revolting things like a woman is committing all of these acts, and that's haram. So if you're coming from like a so-called religious perspective and you're trying to give advice and then you're accusing and you're speaking ill of your sister like that, what religion are you following? And oftentimes, in reality, it's not the religion that a lot of these men are worried about. It's their own like pride or their own uncomfortability that maybe they're seeing a woman that turns them on or arouses them. And that's the reality. Forgive me if I'm sounding quite, straight to the point, but that's ultimately what it is. And then they'll use the religion to kind of like, oh, this is the reason why you're causing too much fitna. But a lot of these same men, they won't have the same level of protection or jealousy, so to speak, or encouragement when they're trying to help women, to encourage women to learn about their religion or even to pray.
Right.
So even when we look at the topic of like Muslim women's dress, the hijab, these are all in the last, maybe you could say 100 years, you find so many books, so many lectures about this topic. Go prior to the 18th century, you won't find many books. I'm not saying this was a topic, but it didn't, it was, people was as obsessed by it as they are now.
Mm,
Like the way a lot of Muslims seem to be obsessed by the exterior as opposed to the interior.
right.
Everything is about how big your beard is. Where is your thobe? Is your trousers up to your ankles? The Muslim women's dress. Everyone is obsessed by that, and unfortunately, even you could say practicing Muslims or whatever. It's like that's how you judge someone as opposed to their character, because you know that someone's character is harder to kind of, if you want to see if someone is like a good person, that's harder to prove because that will be over a period of time and when the person is tested. Whereas to see if someone is a quote unquote good Muslim, let me just see if they've got the Muslim outfit. And again, I always push back to when people talk like that, which religion are you, is that coming from the Quran and the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, or is that something that you're quoting certain scholars at a certain period of time that are saying certain things? So I think first and foremost, I think it's important to equip ourselves with sound knowledge. And again, we're all adults, well, I'm assuming everyone that's listening is an adult. So, and we've got our mind to think. So I just think, especially for the women, because women obviously, unfortunately, also are often on the end of these attacks, to first empower themselves with obviously sound Islamic knowledge from the Quran and the early generation of the Prophet. I mean, early generation of the Muslims, especially the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and then hopefully that can help them in terms of dealing with some of these.
Yeah. That was excellent. Yeah. Yeah, that screen was a little frozen, but that was amazing. That was a great response, and I appreciate that. I think that's fantastic. I actually want to get into the meat of the subject, though, and I'm so interested in finding out more about your books. And you talk a little bit about female orgasm. Actually, a lot of your books actually are dedicated to female orgasm, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that and the books and what you cover in the books regarding that.
Yeah, I would say it's not, a lot of my books aren't particularly about the female orgasm, but about female pleasure.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm differentiating between the two is because female orgasm, we know it's, for many people, it's like the sexual climax or a really intense and pleasurable sexual experience that one can obviously experience. But sexual pleasure is more, it's more broader term, and it's something that, not because there's a lot of people, especially unfortunately a lot of women, who find it difficulty to orgasm, whereas a lot of people have the ability to experience pleasure, and that's why I generally prefer to focus on sexual pleasure as opposed to orgasm, because when people go into sexual encounters and they make orgasm the goal, it can be quite difficult. And I don't think sex should be goal orientated. Whereas if we look at sex as it should be pleasure orientated and it's more holistic, then whether you have an orgasm or not, if you come out of that sexual encounter where you're sexually fulfilled and sexually satisfied, then it's good. Whereas if you make the goal an orgasm and you don't achieve the orgasm, then you may feel that this sexual encounter is not good sex. And I think that's why, although I'd sometimes use female orgasm and I explore the different types of orgasms that a woman can experience, I try and make that clear that that's not the emphasis. So even when we speak about like the orgasm gap, referring to the fact that men generally orgasm more frequently than women during heterosexual encounters, and there is a lot of emphasis or onus placed on women or even men to try and close this orgasm gap so women can orgasm just as frequently as men. I'd prefer to kind of refer to it as the pleasure gap. Like, let's try and make sure women are enjoying sex just as much as men, as opposed to having orgasms just as much as men, because in reality, for us men to climax or to orgasm is very easy. I mean, it doesn't take much to get us turned on. It doesn't take much to get us turned off, basically. Whereas with women, it obviously varies from woman to woman, but it's a more delicate or more complex experience. And I think if we put the emphasis or like the goal as being orgasm, then I think a lot of people maybe can find that they're having satisfying sex, but because it's not orgasmic, then they might feel that they're not having good sex. So I just wanted to kind of explain that difference. So in terms of my books that deal with the orgasm, so my book Kunyaza, I lay out 14 types of orgasms that a woman can experience. And I go into more detail when I do like webinars and things like that. But obviously, most people are familiar with the vaginal orgasm, like an orgasm that a woman can experience via penetrative intercourse. Now, although that's in popular culture and in our modern day sexual script, that's kind of seen as how everyone orgasms. In reality, most men orgasm that way, whereas with women, maybe like 25%, according to some studies, frequently orgasm via penetrative sex. And also I want to show that there's different types of orgasm, like the clitoral orgasm, which for most women is the most effective way to climax, by clitoral stimulation. And then it's important that both men and women understand what is a clitoris, where the clitoris resides, and how you can stimulate it, not only directly, but indirectly. And so I touch on the clitoral orgasm, and I touch on even some issues that some women have in terms of reaching climax or reaching orgasm via clitoral stimulation, especially for women who have undergone genital cutting, like female genital mutilation or female circumcision, because there are some, especially Western sex educators, when they speak about FGM, because I don't think they're as familiar with it, they will say some incorrect things, like if a woman has been, and I don't endorse FGM, I'm just before anyone thinks I do for what I'm going to say. A circumcised woman or woman who has undergone FGM still can experience an orgasm. So the fact that, and even when people say her clitoris has been cut off, therefore she can't experience an orgasm, that's incorrect, because even the woman who has experienced the most severe form of FGM, like type 3, manipulation, where the vagina is sewn up and the clitoral gland is removed, it's only, I'm not saying it's only, but it's the clitoral gland that's removed, not the internal clitoris. So like we know, the majority of the clitoris sits inside the woman's anatomy, body, beneath the labia, and that can still be stimulated even if the clitoral gland has been removed. So and the reason why, and I was speaking to a Nigerian sex educator recently, she was talking about not only her experience being circumcised, but trying to change the belief systems of women who have been circumcised or undergone FGM, because they've been taught, or some of them have been taught, that they can't climax. So if you've been taught that you can't orgasm because you've undergone like circumcision or FGM, you might not allow yourself to get there. So that's why she was talking about, before talking about techniques and things like that, it's important to change the belief system of some women who've been incorrectly taught that they can't climax. So that's why I think we need to be very careful when we're speaking about such topics, because yes, we know the clitoris is the powerhouse of female sexuality, is most important, or one of the most important sexual organs, and there's so much emphasis that's placed upon it nowadays. But then you also have to remember there are millions of women who their clitoris is being cut, but they still can orgasm. And especially because I get messages also from men who are asking again, okay, if my wife has been circumcised, can she still experience an orgasm? Can she still squirt? Actually, the answer is yes to both of those questions, but you may need to be a bit more patient. The same way if a woman has undergone any form of sexual abuse or trauma, again, you may need to be a bit more patient. You may need to understand that there may be certain acts or trigger words that may turn her off, or so that's why it's been more empathetic and sympathetic to women. But that's why, again, I think why it's important that more cross-cultural sexologists and even faith-based sexologists and erotologists are also talking about these things that maybe mainstream Western sex educators aren't kind of familiar with and aren't aware of. So that's some of the stuff that I kind of talk about. So some of the other types of orgasms that a woman can experience, I mentioned clitoral orgasms. We've got blended orgasms, G-spot orgasms, kunyaza orgasms, the mental orgasm where a woman can climax without any physical touch at all, breast or nipple orgasm. So I'll go through a range of these and different ways that a woman can experience orgasm via different forms of techniques. And obviously, first and foremost, and this is something which I try to explain to men, the importance of making sure that the woman mentally is ready to climax before you think, or any form of physical play. Before you think about touching her body, you need to make sure mentally that she is in the right frame of mind psychologically. So, and this is something that I think gets lost on a lot of men when women talk about the importance of feeling safe in the bedroom. That some men think, oh, what do you mean safe? Like, I locked the door. And it's like, no, it's not that. Or financially, like I've got £1 million or £100,000 in my bank account. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that she feels emotionally secure. She feels comfortable in your presence, and that's something that I think a lot of men maybe we do not. Um, Maybe because obviously we've been miseducated from porn or from the bravado of our male friends. That's something we don't place much emphasis on. So when women are talking about emotional intimacy, because that vocabulary is not something generally men use, it kind of gets lost on us. So that's why that's something that I also try to bring in. But speaking about like the psychology of desire and the mental foreplay, a lot of men, because we're generally quite goal orientated, we can't that kind of gets lost on a lot of them. So it's just that's also something that I try to cover in my books, especially Kunyaza and A Taste of Honey.
Yeah. You bring up so many good points that it's tough to talk about all of them. But yeah, absolutely. You're talking about making a woman feel safe, consent. All of those things are so, so important, right? To having a meaningful relationship with your spouse, and how to, make it comfortable and a safe environment for that woman to orgasm. You're absolutely right. I was wondering also, you mentioned a little bit about the G spot, but then in your books, you mention it as the K spot. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So the case, what I refer to the clitoris, both that. So I refer to the clitoris as the K spot, and I refer to the K spot. So this is what, if anyone's wondering, this is what a clitoris looks like, the full anatomy of a clitoris. And obviously we know that it sits majority of it sits internally, and only like a little bit sits, you can see externally on a woman's bodies. But I refer to the entire clitoris as a K spot, paying homage to the Kunyaza tradition, and because it kind of resembles a K spot or like a wishbone. And the reason why I refer to it as the K spot is to let people know, especially both men and women, that it's not just one particular area that you kind of need to focus on. We know with the G spot, obviously, since it was coined in the 80s, that everyone is looking for this so-called magical spot, when in reality, what is commonly the area that is referred to as the G spot, which is like a couple of inches on the upper interior wall of the vagina, that is part of the clitoris. It's part of the inner clitoris. So, but because again, a lot of people are just kind of looking for this particular spot, and it's important that people understand that for some women, that G spot area, shall we call it, is the most sensitive part, or the most is the area that they're most receptive to in terms of sexual stimuli. For other women, it might be the clitoral gland. For other women, it might be indirect stimulation. So I wanted to kind of make sure, or to try and help people, that they're not just concentrating on one particular area, because not every woman, the G spot is the most sensitive or the easiest way to climax. And that's something that popular culture, following obviously the publication of Beverly Whipple's book and naming the G spot, and then even in music, songs and TV programs, everyone's obsessed with the G spot. Now everyone's trying to find this G spot rather than finding the most erogenous zone for that particular woman, because every woman is different. For one woman, it might be the G spot. For another woman, it might be the clitoral gland. For another woman, it might be the Mount Venus, which a lot of people don't know, but those indented marks on the lower back of a woman's body. For some women, it's the inner thigh. But if you're a man, or even a woman, but if you're a man and you're trying to understand your woman's body, and you're trying to understand and explore it with her, then you will find what is the most erogenous zone for her, not for every other woman. So I think that's why I wanted to call it a K spot, so people can explore the other parts of the clitoris that she might be more receptive to experiencing sexual stimuli, as opposed to that particular area which is in the vagina, in the anterior wall of the vagina.
Mm-hmm. That's so important to realize, is that what you said about the clitoris, right? The way that I describe it, it's like what we see of the clitoris is just like the tip of the iceberg, right? What you said, most of it sits inside of that pelvic anatomy, and really it's just the tip of it that we see. Yeah.
And just in addition to the clitoris, so even like with things, I'm sure you've probably come across with the work that you do. But with the what's that condition? Clitoral phimosis, where the clitoral hood, because this is something that again a number of men and women unfortunately are not aware of. When a woman's, because I was having a workshop and I was speaking about smegma, and then someone said, "Oh yeah, that's just something that happens to men, and I was like, no, women can produce smegma as well. And again, just for the benefit of anyone listening, smegma is like the oily or like dead skin cells, which kind of can accumulate for men under the foreskin if a man is not circumcised, and for women, either on the things like the external labia, the
Yeah.
fold,
Yeah.
or it can accumulate under the clitoral hood. And then for some women who have a lot of smegma, what can happen is that their clitoral hood, if it becomes stuck to the clitoral glands, and we know obviously when a woman is aroused, the clitoral hood naturally retracts, and it's easier for the clitoral glands to be stimulated, the clitoris to be stimulated. Now, if a woman has, for example, a lot of smegma because it hasn't been cleaned or what have you, she can develop a condition called a clitoral phimosis or clitoral adhesions, and that's quite popular. Like I was listening to one urologist, and she mentioned, I think between 22% or 33% of women suffer from this particular condition. So if a woman is suffering from this particular condition, and obviously any form of, even when she's aroused, any form of touch on the clitoral area, it's going to hurt her. She may feel that like the clitoris is not an erogenous zone that works for her, but it might, the solution can be very easily fixed, as in, no, it may be that you might need to clean the smegma. And obviously for some women who suffer from that condition, and it's quite severe, there are some like clitoral hood reduction surgeries and other things. But the point is that there's a lot of people don't understand the female anatomy, both men and women alike, unfortunately. And more emphasis is placed on understanding male anatomy and women's anatomy. When we speak about reproduction, we want to understand that. Procreation, let's understand it. But when it comes to pleasure, and this particular urologist was saying that there seems to be a reluctance amongst medical doctors. That's why I'm glad with the work that you're doing to kind of speak about that women's right to pleasure and things like that. It's not just about the vagina being a birth canal; it's also an organ where she can experience sexual pleasure. So that was something that, again, I don't think a lot of people are kind of even aware of when we're speaking about the clitoris. That it may not be that it's not working, or it may be that it might be a case of like she might be suffering from that condition, clitoral phimosis.
Right. So important. I'm wondering if you can just talk to us a little bit about the difference between female ejaculation, squirting, and, you mentioned a little bit of urinary incontinence that some women can experience, when they orgasm. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the difference between those three expulsions or free fluids, which I'll touch on in Kunyaza. So generally speaking, I know people often use the term female ejaculation, squirting synonymously, but they're two quite different phenomena, as in female ejaculation generally refers to a small expulsion of fluid that emanates from the urethra, basically the pee hole, when a woman is sexually aroused or stimulated, whereas squirting is generally referred to as a large gush of fluid that again emanates or expels from the urethra. So basically it's the pee hole. And then obviously there's urinary incontinence, where a woman is involuntary urinating, and that comes from like the pee hole as well. Now, obviously, and unfortunately, especially if a woman, when a woman is ready to squirt or ejaculate, the experience and sensation that she feels is similar to when she wants to urinate. So that's why there's some women, especially if they're not aware or understand their body and their sexual arousal, when they're during a sexual encounter, they have that feeling where they want to squirt or ejaculate. They feel like they're going to pee, I urinate, and then they stop. They hold it. They stop, as in they don't allow themselves to let go. They might even go to the bathroom and things like that. So this is something, and because of the shame, especially in the West, that's placed on squirting and female ejaculation, a lot of women don't allow themselves to let go. Whereas, and that's why I wanted to show with the Kunyaza book and the tradition in Rwanda and Eastern Central Africa, where it's practically, where it's commonly practiced, that they didn't have this cultural shame attached towards female ejaculate. That if a woman squirts or she ejaculates, and that because of that, again, the belief system was that women's sexual fluids were normalized. There was nothing wrong with it. So a woman was able to be comfortable with her partner. Whereas if women have been told that, it's pee, it's urine, even during sexual encounters when she's in the throes of delight, she's naturally going to hold herself back, so she can't even allow herself to fully be free. And this is where even I think men, we can play a part by obviously first educating ourselves, understanding the difference, and then also allowing women to feel comfortable about their bodies, and also to literally let themselves go and don't kind of feel that you need to kind of police them or police their body. So it's something that with the book I wanted to show, because I delved into a number of the research, because there are a number of research studies and they go into detail in terms of the difference between the female ejaculate fluid and the squirting fluid and urinary incontinence and things like that. But I just wanted to show that for like the academics or the researchers who are really passionate about it. But for the layperson, I didn't want to spend too much. I don't generally go into too much detail with that, because for me, the way I look at it, if a woman has told you that this experience is different to urine, that's enough for you to believe her. You don't need, for me, why do you need, especially it's generally a man, in some laboratory to kind of validate a woman's sexual experience? You don't have that with men. Like if someone were to say like pre-cum, and we know there's probably some small trace of urine in there, why is it that every time when it's women's sexual experiences, we need to kind of validate it with science? Whether it's a female orgasm, does it exist? Is it hysteria? Is she an nymphomaniac? Whether it's female ejaculate, is it a myth? There's a lot of and that's one of the problems. That again, there's a lot of like skepticism surrounding women's experiences or sexual experiences. And oftentimes, if you really want to know the answer, you just have to ask the woman herself. Yeah. And that's why, as much I'm kind of showing the research and the history and this, that, and the other, it's not I'm showing science to kind of prove that female ejaculate exists or squirting exists or orgasm exists. No, the testimony of a woman should be enough. But because unfortunately we've grown up to not believe or not listen to women, it's like we need science or something to kind of prove that actually no, by the way, female ejaculate exists. And I also wanted to demonstrate, even when we look at some of these studies where they kind of speculate whether the ejaculatory fluid, whether it's urine or not, how much traces of urine in it, the sample study is really small. Like one of the biggest studies that's often cited, it's a sample size of 7 women in France. And I'm just, even that in and of itself. So you've got this sample size of 7 women in France. It's ridiculously small, and then you're using the results of that to extrapolate to say, yes, this proves that female ejaculate is urine, despite the fact you've got hundreds of testimonies of women that say, no, the smell, the taste, the feeling is totally different. Shouldn't that be enough for you to believe us?
Right.
You know, so that's the reason why I kind of speak about the studies, but to kind of not to totally disprove it, but then it's like, surely, again, the testimonies of women, shouldn't that be enough for you?
Yeah. You know, that's very true, and you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of people do not believe women, and that's the biggest problem, right? They also talk about that with when women feel pain, right?
Yeah.
And we don't believe that, and that's where all this maternal health crisis comes in. But absolutely. So, you know, I'm wondering if you know, you could tell us a little bit about the webinar you have coming up on March 19th. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I have a webinar 19th of March. It's going to be, I think it's 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. UK time and around 4 p.m. PST. But yeah, it's available on the bio of my Instagram page here. So it's called Loving Women and Sacred Intimacy, which is it's a Taste of Honey webinar. So this webinar will be mainly focusing on similar to kind of the topics we've covered, but obviously in more detail and giving more practical advice in terms of you could say the Muslim sexual secrets to female orgasm and women's sexual satisfaction. We'll be talking about the 14 types of female orgasm, the different types of vulvas, like the 9 types of vulvas, the different types of sexual desire response models that both Muslim erotologists and modern sexologists have spoken about. And a lot of it will be the work that what I've spoke about in A Taste of Honey, Women of Desire, will mainly be that. So sometimes I do webinars about kunyas and squirting, whereas this one, and it's mainly going to be geared to Muslims or anyone interested in Islamic sexology or Muslim erotology. Because I do webinars, like I said, for the general public, but this one I want to mainly come from like a Muslim or an Islamic perspective, because I do get a number of questions, especially from women, where they ask questions about a lot of sexual acts, or is this permissible, whether it's like female masturbation. That the fact that scholars spoke about this, many scholars spoke about this again hundreds of years ago, and again some scholars totally against it, and some scholars said they had no issue with it whatsoever. And again, a lot of people, but you don't hear about these fatwas, you know, even acts like oral sex. A lot of scholars have no issue with it whatsoever. So I just wanted to kind of, again, with this particular webinar, be more, like I said, Muslim focused and speaking about, you could say, I don't know if you want to call it halal intimacy, but not only speaking about sexual acts, but also the importance of emotional intimacy. And because there's going to be some men obviously attending, and obviously there'll be women as well. So I want to make sure we speak about emotional intimacy as well, because I've had some interesting attendees where people think, okay, I've had a couple of men say, okay, if I'm giving a woman her rights, like financially providing for her, I'm giving her clothing, I'm giving her food, why do I need to give her emotional support? Why do I need to give her emotional intimacy? Is that her right? And I'm just like, what kind of,
Yeah,
like,
logic.
what religion are you following? Yeah, it's just, but he was actually serious. He's like, that's not her right. If I'm giving, her food, clothing, and it's just like, no, it's treating someone well, and we're not even encouraged, we're instructed as men to treat our women well. If that's what she needs and that's what she wants to feel happy, then end of story. But again, we've got this, some of us have this very regimented approach towards, I don't know, like women, that if I give them ABC, then that's enough, and anything else that they want is like, yeah. So I want to kind of demystify some of these rights that women have, which is fine for Muslims to understand it, because I think oftentimes, unless they feel that there's some validity in the religion, they don't want to hear it. They think it's all from feminism or the West, where no, there were women in the past who demanded these things, not only sexual fulfillment, but also emotional intimacy in our tradition. So I think men will probably need to hear about this more.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much cultural baggage, right, that we bring onto religion that sometimes it's difficult to separate the two. So I'm glad that you're doing this. I've registered. I'm excited to also hear you speak about that. I'm wondering, in maybe the few minutes that we have remaining, if you could just talk a little bit about maybe some takeaways for our listeners and for the people that joined in on this webinar, what you would advise. I know
Oh,
you
that's a
didn't
good.
give like fatwas or anything like that. I'm not asking for
Yeah,
that, but maybe just some
that's a good.
takeaways about pleasure.
Um, that women should know that they're entitled to sexual fulfillment and sexual pleasure. Um, do not be afraid to vocalize your desires, especially with your spouse, because I think it's one thing having those conversations with your girlfriends and complaining and saying, but if you're not vocalizing and asking and demanding, and I'm using the word intentionally, demanding your right from your husband, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for him to fulfill that. So I think we need to empower women themselves and not wait for others to empower them. And I think one way of doing that is by knowledge. So you know that you're right, and like you don't feel shame to ask for that, because again, it's your right. The same way a lot of women feel the right to be loved, I think they also have the right to be sexually satisfied, and they have the right to experience an orgasm. So this is something that I think women need to empower themselves with, as opposed to waiting for someone else to empower them. And there is, like I said, a rich tradition in our religion of sexually empowered Muslim women. And there are resources, because a number of people say, okay, if you didn't know that before, but you know that now. And there are a number of resources, not only books, but also people you can reach out to, and women that you can reach out to who can educate you. So I think ignorance is not an excuse, kind of thing anymore. Sorry if that kind of comes across quite harsh, but I just think that, we have a beautiful tradition, and there are resources again. So it's not a case of we need to kind of continue living in the darkness.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And you coming to us all the way from the UK, that's fantastic. I can't wait to hear more of your thoughts on the webinar on March 19th. And is there a link, or maybe you can put it in the chat? I don't know. You go on
There
Eventbrite.
is a link. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so if you go to my page, and if you click the link on my page, it will take you to a like link tree, and then you can see, I think it's the second one down, but you can access the A Taste of Honey webinar, find out more if you wanted to sign up and register. So
That's great.
and it is going to be recorded as well. So again, I'm not sure. Again, you said people coming from different time zones, so they can, if they can't watch it live, they can obviously rewatch it. So there'll be recordings available.
Sure, sure. Do you have any other webinars coming up in the year that you know?
Yeah, I'm scheduled to do another like 4 or 5. So probably post for Ramadan. So I'll probably will go silent for Ramadan, and then I'll kick off again. Probably like around May. I'll probably do the Kunyaza webinars are more popular kind of thing. So I'll see how this one goes. I think it's always quite difficult framing like Muslim sex or Muslim intimacy, because I think even a number of Muslims are uncomfortable by it. But if I just say like sex or squirting or how to pleasure, then they're more interested in it. Like the five love language. I'm always like, you happily buy a Christian intimacy book, which is fine, you know, like the five love languages. But if something comes from like an Islamic or Muslim, you want to stay clear from that. And that's something I have noticed, that people are more readily would want to sign up or listen to a Kunyaza webinar. But if I were to say like an Islamic intimacy or Muslim intimacy, they'll be like, no, I don't want to hear that. Because again, we view sex, we view spirituality to be devoid of sexuality, when, like I said, in pre-modern time, they didn't have this understanding. So it might take a while for even people to get to that understanding where, no, Islam is a sex positive and a sexually empowered religion, that female have the right to sexual pleasure. Because I think a lot of people find that even difficult to kind of, for that to coexist in their minds kind of thing. So, but yeah, I do have a few more webinars hopefully this year after Ramadan.
Excellent. How about any courses that you teach or anything like that? Or
yeah, I'm working on, yeah, that's something that's in the pipeline. Yeah, I'm thinking of again doing a Kunyaza like / masterclass webinar, but I'll see how that goes. I generally I know it might not sound like this because I've been talking for God knows how long. I generally don't like talking for too long, so I prefer either connecting people, put books out there, and then people can kind of find their way. And one of the things, or I would say, some of the dangers of courses I find is that, especially with men, that is, I'm not telling people do this and then this will happen. I'm giving people tools, like a guide. So you find what works for you. The same way with my books, or what I try to present in my courses, is that, yes, there may be a wealth of information or wealth of techniques, so it's for you to kind of choose which works for you. But not everything will work for you, and it's not supposed to. You're not the same way like with the Kama Sutra. You're not supposed to use it like bedroom gymnastics, the way everyone does, and they want to tick off every 64 arts of Kama Sutra. It's no, pick which works for you, and that was why it was written. So that's why with courses, because I'm not going to be giving like promises that if you do this, the woman is going to squirt gushing orgasms, and if she's going to experience, like, I don't want to start selling. I'm not selling dreams, put it that way. So that's why I've been holding back from doing courses for a while, but we'll see. We'll see. I might change my mind.
Sure, sure. The last question I have for you before we go is, you have a publishing company, is that correct? Rabba
Oh yes,
Publishers?
I do. Yes, I do.
So,
yeah. So after, yeah. Sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to say, so what types of books are you publishing? Is it, your own brand, or?
Yeah, it's really my own book. So after so my first book, I went with a publisher, and that's like probably will require another webinar. But then I realized with publishing, I've got my own way of marketing, and I learned a bit about the industry, and then I thought, actually, I would rather publish my own books, because one of the things, and this is for any writer or any aspiring writers, that if you're going with a publisher, you oftentimes will lose creative control in terms of the way the book is presented, the way it's marketed, even certain chapters and headings and stuff like that. And because I knew after my first book I wanted to kind of start writing more about like sex and intimacy, I would want to market it myself. Even like from the cover, I wanted to have creative control. And obviously, if you're willing to do the hard work, it's also more lucrative as well, if I'm honest with you. So that's why I set up my own publishing company. I've not yet published anyone else's books, so it's just all my books. But that's something that I might look into in the future as well.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jazakallah khair. I really appreciate your time and all of the information, and you provided us with so much knowledge today. Thank you so, so much. I just want everyone to sign up for your webinar on March 19th. I think it's going to be excellent, and I'm so looking forward to it. So thank you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to chat again. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.